Hi, I'm Jack.
And I'm Christian, and today we're going to be talking to you guys about the debate between usage of nitrogen fertilizer and regulation of nitrogen fertilizer.
Right. So my argument is that is run the general sense of how reducing the amount of nitrogen fertilization can be beneficial for the environment, and while still finding adjustments for replacements that can work out for farmers in meeting a quota.
And my argument is going to be discussing the fact that I don't believe that nitrogen fertilizer should be regulated at a government or local scale. Rather, I think it should be up to the farmer to be mindful of their own surroundings and conservation of their own land and property.
So with regulating, first and foremost, having a robust amount of nitrogen in fertilization can often be a bad and worrying thing for the environment. For starters, the overuse of nitrogen fertilization can lead to a heavy amount of oxygen pollution and water pollution of CO2, and it can carry a large substance of fossil fuels waste on top of the Earth's climate. Every year, the amount of nitrogen fertilizer purchased has reached up to a usage of 600,000 tons of nitrogen fertilizer, up to a growing rate of 25% ever since the year 1980. Other effects discovered by the UC Center for Water Shed Science reports in California reported finding substance of nitrate in local drinking waters, which can lead to a disease called methemoglobinemia. This disease restricts the blood in your body to be able to receive oxygen and cuts the circulation needed to course throughout the human body. Now the incentives for using nitrogen fertilizer is quite understandable, as farmers need to reach a quarterly pay to be able to produce large amounts of healthy and strong variables of vegetation for human consumption. But having too much of nitrogen is bad. If there's an overflow of nitrogen in soil, it can pour elsewhere in the environment and influence other substances that should not have that quantity amount. So there needs to be an act for regulation, because once it interacts with the human body or with different animals, it can prove hazardous in our respiratory system and restrict blood flow. We can work to regulate this efficiently by doing things such as monitoring the silting and operations around landfills, include better management of soil distribution, and even things such as organic material, like using starfish waste as a strong replacement component, and to diminish the amount of metals interacting in the soil compounds. If we regulate the amount of nitrogen fertilization in our soil, we can see changes in our environment's ecosystem, and we can see the growth of aridity and reduce global heating for plant and aquatic life of our own, and most importantly, to extend the planet's existence.
Well, I do acknowledge many of the possible risks of nitrogen fertilizers. I'm taking the opposite side on that because growing up on a farm firsthand, I know many of the benefits of using nitrogen fertilizers, and I believe that the use of nitrogen fertilizers for agriculture are extremely necessary. So I'm going to be arguing that the use of nitrogen fertilizer should not be limited to the point that a farmer will suffer any economic or yield losses. In other words, farmers should not be allowed should be allowed to use as much nitrogen fertilizers as they feel necessary to not suffer any economic damages. With a global population that continues to grow and agricultural land that continues to shrink with urban development, the need for higher yields is becoming more and more important. The United States plays a major role in worldwide agriculture production, and many farmers across America rely on agriculture for their livelihood. Although soils naturally contain nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus and other nutrients that are necessary for them to grow, growing crops such as corn and other big cash crops greatly decrease the nutrient content in the fields and overall the effectiveness of the field. Furthermore, once nitrogen is applied to a field over the growing season, what isn't used up by the farm or by the crops is often sent deeper into the ground, further than the crops can actually reach, leaving the topsoil where the crops grow completely deprived of nutrients such as nitrogen. And without replenishing these nutrients, you're going to see a great loss in the effectiveness of the field and the yields. And with lower yields, not only do farmers struggle economically, but you'll see a decrease in the amount of availability of crops, not only for the United States, but worldwide. With that crop prices may increase because of the lower demand, and we may have eventually trouble feeding many of the growing population of the world. While these nutrients can be naturally replenished, it takes a lengthy amount of time, longer than what farmers have before the next crops need to go back in. I believe that the economic benefits outweigh the possible harmful effects of nutrient fertilizer usage. Well, so now that we each know where each other stand with all this, what do you think, or what are the costs and effects of not using nitrogen fertilizers?
Well, you can actually regulate without any cost, or most costs. Well, and certainly there are regulation costs, specifically targeting a lower vegetation rate of suitable plant growth for human consumption. But as stated before in the agricultural waste article, we can literally innovate other substances organically in the organic matter of decomposition and of other harmless similar effects for other substances which indicate that farmers won't have to suffer if they choose the lower cost method. The article Global Nitrogen Cycling Out of Control indicates that farmers do things like to simply improve on ways to rotate their crops through better mapping and supply, which they could do. If we wanted the best option, everyone would have to become a vegetarian, seriously, and I don't think anyone's going to want to be that anytime soon. So, everyone would have to be a vegetation, and do not worry about the growth, and we both know. If we don't regulate the amount of reactive nitrogen in our soil, it can accumulate to every day, and it will specifically cause global warming, and that's why we need to introduce management possibilities.
Well, yeah, I agree that you have some good points, especially when you're talking about crop rotation. I think crop rotation is a very effective method. One of the only problems with crop rotation is oftentimes every other year that you're rotating a crop, you're taking an economic loss because it might not be quite as an effective cash crop, such as where I'm from, we do corn, soybean, and on the soybean years you just don't make as much. But although it is effective and they're still profiting somewhat, the fields may still suffer.
So that is an interesting point of view, and you seem to have a lot of economic concerns in relation to eliminating large amounts of nitrogen fertilization in soil. So why do you feel that the benefits of using nitrogen fertilization outweighs the harmful effects of the environment of the human population?
Okay, well, I mean, like any profession, I mean, farming's a job, and it's all based off of money. And when farmers don't produce what they need to support their family, they're taking an economic hit. And many farmers, especially in very farming intensive areas where crops are going in every single year and that they're trying to grow as much possible, such as where I'm from, nitrogen usage is just absolutely necessary to support those yields and support the prices. Beyond the lower aspect of farmers individually trying to make enough money to make ends meet and to make a good living, it's more on a state and area and even global scale, because as everyone knows, and what we've discussed in class is about overpopulation and growing population across the world. And the United States is one of the leading producers of food worldwide, especially grains such as corn and wheat. And not only that, but a lot of agriculture is used to produce grain to feed the cattle, which, I mean, the Midwest is a major exporter of beef. And without this increased yields, you're going to see a decrease in the amount of food we actually get out of the country. Beyond that, farmland is decreasing more than ever because of urban development and expanding cities and highways. Constantly more things are being put through fields, and farmers are having to sell their fields or getting them taken away from them. And this is decreasing the amount of land we can actually grow crops on. So the need for higher yields to grow more food on a smaller area is more important than ever. So I've been talking a lot about how reducing the amount of nitrogen you use you might run the risk of not getting your crops out in time for the winter because they're not going to grow as fast. So how do you plan to create more efficient methods while limiting nitrogen usage?
That may be true in the sense of farmers not being able to get their crops out in time, but it's important to understand that if you ignore these issues for an extended period of time, sooner or later it will take forever to catch up on the damage that has been done to the environment. But the article Understanding Plant Responses to Nitrogen Limitation for the Improvement of Crop Nitrogen Use Efficiency found that if you conduct lab tests, we can actually find that if we convey rice or other types of compounds of nitrate, we can use transunic lines of an EMS of nitrate with a protein maker gene to figure out what's the best fit for a complete different use. So in actuality, the timely factor in plants adjustments to a lower and to a no amount of nitrate can actually, in actuality, we studied at a much more rapid rate under a controlled environment. So you've mentioned that you want to keep up the use of nitrogen fertilization specifically for your farmers because you don't want to end up being behind in all your work. But there have been cases of disposing nitrogen fertilization incorrectly and often getting into other substances that shouldn't have nitrogen fertilization. Like for an example, dispose nitrogen fertilization in possible drinking waters, and that can be harmful for the human population. So without limiting the usage of nitrogen fertilization, how do you plan to limit the damage done to the environment?
Yeah, well, and I acknowledge that misuse of nitrogen and nitrogen fertilizers can cause damage to the environment, and that's why I think it's important for it's important for farmers to take responsibility for their own actions and for them to actually be held accountable if they do misuse nitrogen fertilizers. As I stated before, I believe that farmers should be able to use as much nitrogen as they want so that they don't suffer any economic loss. What I don't believe they should be able to do is just go dump it into drinking water and groundwater. So, and I don't think farmers want to do that either because it's their streams and their drinking water that they're polluting. So that's why I believe it's important for farmers to be responsible with their nitrogen use, and there's a couple different ways that farmers can go about that. So one of the main ways, and this is just what we do back at home on our farm, is every year when nitrogen fertilizer is going to be used, test samples are taken from the soil, sent into a lab, and are tested for how much nitrogen is in the soil at that moment. And then, therefore, they return with the amount that we're allowed or recommended to use in that field so that it doesn't run off from rainfall or doesn't seep into the groundwater. So that the goal every year is for all the crop to use all the nitrogen that is placed on the field, so you don't have any excess getting into the wrong places. Another important thing that a lot of farmers need to be doing that not all of them aren't, or not all of them are doing, are things such as repairing buffer strips along streams and leaving grass areas along waterways. Many farmers have waterways, drainage ditches that go right through the middle of their field, and although it might be tempting to plow right up next to it to get as much acreage possible to farm, this grass and the trees and shrubs are really important in filtering out nutrients so that they don't get in the water. So those are a couple different ways that I think farmers personally need to be responsible with how they're using their nitrogen without actually having a regulation.
So while I do understand your incentives for wanting to keep up with the use of nitrogen fertilization, specifically for farmers being able to make back their pay at the end of a quarter and to provide a strong vegetation for the human population. But nitrogen also has long-term effects that can leave a negative impact on the environment. It's also important to note that regulating its usage doesn't have to reduce the growth rate at which they grow their crops, and that other fertilizers can take its place and produce often similar effects in the short run.
Well, I acknowledge that overuse of nitrogen can cause environmental problems and potential human health risks. I believe it's important for farmers to be able to use as much as they want so that they don't suffer any economic loss. Therefore, I'm concluding that nitrogen use should not be regulated, but should rather be handled responsibly by the farmer.